Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like-minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but 2 of my last 3 trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company, again, is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Amateur Traveler, Episode 80. Today the Amateur Traveler goes to Rwanda and Uganda to see the mountain gorillas.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no. 15-hour flight, oh, I don't think I'll ever be coming home. You know I love it. I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. I have 2 news stories for you today. The first one, if you're flying to Europe anytime in the future, you may think about avoiding that old standby flying to London. UK has just increased the taxes to fly into London so that now it will cost nearly $300 US just in taxes to fly into London. You can fly into Amsterdam nearby for about half that in taxes. In the odd travel story of the week, those of you who've flown and watched the in-flight movie know that that movie is edited so that the little kids on the plane won't have to hear any bad language. Well, someone got a little carried away, and the recent showing of the movie The Queen had all mentions of God bleeped out in the version that was distributed to Delta and other airlines. A reference to God is not taboo in any culture that I know of. Klein of the Jaguar Distribution Company said, "We excise foul language, excessive violence, and nudity. Airline passengers watching the movie hear, 'Bleep, bless you, ma'am,' as one character speaks to the Queen, and all the word God is bleeped out 7 times. And no, I don't think it's a left-wing conspiracy. I think it's funny." I'd like to welcome Chris Willis back onto the show. Chris, it seems like it was just yesterday that we talked.
Well, it was pretty recently, but I appreciate
the day before yesterday, I think.
Right, but I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Chris.
Now, when we had you on last time to talk about Ethiopia, that was almost we told you that story so we could tell you this one. The real purpose of that trip that included Ethiopia was going to see the mountain gorillas.
Right. It's something that my wife and I have been wanting to do for a really long time, and finally decided that we felt secure enough with the security situation in Rwanda and Uganda that we'd be comfortable going there, and so we went ahead and planned it.
Now, there is a theme here. You were on last year talking about swimming with whales. You're on now talking about mountain gorillas. There seems to be an affinity for large mammals, or at least large animals.
Yeah, certainly that's the case. The whales were kind of my idea. The gorillas have historically been a passion for my wife. It's something that she's always had a keen interest in and has been wanting for years to go and do this. And I certainly wasn't going to complain because I love this sort of thing as well.
So any tricks in terms of arranging this as we start about this, first of all, going into Rwanda and Uganda and planning a trip to go up and see the mountain gorillas?
Sure,
any extra planning that was needed?
Oh, absolutely, because the problem is that there is a very strict limit on the number of people who can go and visit wild mountain gorillas in those two countries, and in order to do so, you have to get a permit, and there's a very limited number of permits available. In Rwanda, there's 56 permits available per day, and in Uganda, there's 32.
In the whole country?
Yes.
Wow.
Because they have a finite number of gorilla families that people can go and visit. There's 7 in Rwanda, and there's 4 in Uganda, and each one gets a maximum of 8 visitors per day. Correspondingly, there's been a huge uptick in demand of people wanting to go see the gorillas because the safety situation is stable now. It's been featured on a bunch of TV shows, and it's become a pretty popular thing to do. And so it's become commonplace for them to sell out their permits, 4 to 6 months in advance. So any trip along these lines that one of your viewers would want to plan would need to be planned, at least 6 months in advance. We planned in February and March for a January trip the next year.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned wild mountain gorillas. You told me before we started recording that I can't just go to a zoo and see a mountain gorilla.
No, there's not a single mountain gorilla in any zoo anywhere in the world. There's only 750 or so in existence in the world, but the gorillas that you generally see in zoos are called western lowland gorillas, which are far more numerous. There's probably 90 or 100,000 of them in the wild, although they're still threatened. They're far more numerous than mountain gorillas, and physically they look very different. A western lowland gorilla has relatively short hair and is a little bit smaller, whereas a mountain gorilla would be distinctive first and foremost for having really long, fluffy hair, and they're slightly larger as well.
What's the highlight of the trip? Tell us a little bit about what this experience is like.
Sure. Well, you go to a park office, whether you're doing it in Uganda or Rwanda. You assemble there with the other tourists who are there to go gorilla trekking that day, and you're assigned to a particular group. As I said, in Rwanda there's 7. In Uganda there's 1 in one place and 4 in another place. They assign you to a group, and then one of the park rangers gives you a little bit of an introduction about what you're about to experience and gives you the rules for how to conduct yourself during the gorilla visit. You then typically drive to the starting point of the gorilla trek, and you may have to trek anywhere between half an hour and 4 hours, sometimes through dense jungle, sometimes up the side of a steep volcano, sometimes through fields of stinging nettles, or sometimes through farmland, to arrive at the gorillas. When you do so, you drop your bags, 100 meters or so away, and then you proceed to go look at the gorillas, and you approach them quietly and just have an hour to observe them. They may be moving around, so you may move around with them or may move around to get a better view as they go into or out of vegetation. And you spend an hour watching this particular gorilla family, hopefully getting some good pictures of them. And when the hour's over, the park ranger tells you that you have to leave, and then you hike back.
So you said that the ranger is giving you preparation. What kind of preparation did they tell you? What did they tell you to expect, what they tell you to do, and what not to do?
Generally, the guidelines that exist in the park are designed to minimize the risk that people will transmit diseases to the gorillas. Again, it's a very critically endangered animal, and they want to keep them all healthy. And because they're so genetically similar to humans, they're capable of catching human diseases. And there have been some incidents of that in the past. So you're required to maintain a certain distance between yourself and the gorillas. The guideline is 7 meters or 21 feet. And in addition, they strictly forbid anybody from touching a gorilla. And on those occasions where the gorillas try to touch tourists, which they will do sometimes, they'll generally try to shoo the gorilla away or move the tourist out of the way to prevent that conduct from happening. They also want you to be quiet. You can't use the flash on your camera because that irritates the gorillas. And, if you do get into an unlikely situation where one of the silverbacks will charge you, you just have to kind of stay still and get into a submissive posture, and nothing further will happen.
Now, a gorilla is a very powerful animal. You did not get into one of these experiences where you were charged by a silverback, I gather?
No, in fact, the attitude of the gorillas toward us, we did 4 gorilla treks, so we saw 4 different groups, and the attitude was generally one of completely ignoring us. They were very blasé about our presence there, with a few of the younger ones being more affirmatively curious and looking at us or coming up toward us or approaching us. And we did have one incident where a young male tried to touch one of the tourists in one of our groups. But no aggression at all by any of the gorillas towards us.
They're mostly bored with tourists by this point, it sounds like.
Sure. Well, they're habituated groups that have been visited by tourists every day, every year, for years. And so a lot of the gorillas are young enough that they've probably been visited by people every day of their lives. So that's the whole nature of the habituation program there, and to them, seeing people is no big deal.
Interesting. You were saying earlier, before we started talking, that some of this started with the research of Diane Fossey. Can you talk more about the relationship between the tourism and some of the support of the gorillas that's going on through groups like that?
Sure. Well, Diane Fossey is the person who's most recognized for promoting conservation of mountain gorillas, and ultimately she died protecting the gorillas, and she was, of course, featured in the movie Gorillas in the Mist. She habituated gorillas in Rwanda for the purpose of studying them and learning about their behavior and their social relationships with one another. Having gotten that ball rolling, then the habituation program was expanded to provide groups of gorillas that were habituated that tourists could go and visit, which is what we did on our trip. And the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund International, the Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Project, and some other organizations are still very actively involved in studying gorillas in Rwanda and Uganda, taking care of them, making sure that efforts are made to preserve their habitat and protect them from diseases. And they're very involved in the management and conservation of the gorillas in both countries.
And what's the relationship? Is the tourism good for the gorillas? Is it harmful?
I think generally it's thought to be good for the gorillas for a couple of reasons. One is that the revenue that the governments of Rwanda and Uganda generate by charging people for permits goes back into paying for rangers who protect the gorillas from poachers and who protect the habitat from encroachment by nearby farmers. There's revenue that's earned by local people working as porters or tour guides or selling handicrafts or things like that, which gives them an incentive to promote gorilla conservation and to protect them. It's something that creates an atmosphere where the funds and willingness to protect the gorillas are available. And certainly there's an opportunity for the gorillas to be harmed by tourism if it's overdone, but I think that the balance that they have now with limiting it to 8 people and limiting it only to an hour strikes a good balance between protecting the gorillas and providing enough access that tourists will want to go there. So I think overall the general feeling is that gorilla tourism is one of the models of ecotourism that benefits local communities, benefits the animals, and is an exciting activity for tourists to do.
You had prepared quite a lot before you went here. What caught you by surprise, even after all that preparation?
I guess what caught me by surprise most was just the feeling that you experience when you see the gorillas in the wild. You can do all the reading about it that you want, and you can look at it on TV, but when you're face-to-face with a gorilla, a silverback, or even a little baby, and they're looking into your eyes, and you're looking at them, or you're watching 2 baby gorillas play, or watching a mother take care of her baby, you feel really a sense of connection with them that's different than I think you're going to experience in almost any other kind of game viewing environment. They're so similar to humans. They have so many human characteristics and mannerisms that it's really easy to feel an instant connection with them, and that's an awe-inspiring feeling that you really have to experience to know.
And as you're there, the guide who you have, the ranger, I assume, knows this group, and they've even got names for everybody and can identify the different gorillas? Or
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they intimately know these gorillas. They know every one of their names. They know what their behavioral predilections are. They know particular ones can be aggressive or particular ones like to touch tourists. They know where they like to hang out and what they like to eat. They know everything about these gorillas.
And how do you recognize the different gorillas? You mentioned something in your notes there that was interesting.
Well, the gorilla's nose print is the primary way that they identify them. So you look at the gorilla's nose and the pattern around its nose and just above its nose, and those are as unique as human fingerprints. And in fact, they even have little cards there that you can buy that have face shots of the different gorillas in each group, and it's got each gorilla's name and a little drawing of the distinctive features of their nose print.
And one thing I don't think you said so far is, when you talk about getting close to these gorillas, how close?
It depends on the circumstances, but we had numerous instances of being within 5 to 10 feet of them. And generally, we'd be either at that or maybe a little bit more, 20 or 30 feet.
But you mentioned that even with that distance, it still isn't all that easy to take pictures of these gorillas.
No, it's a big photographic challenge for a lot of reasons. You start off with the fact that you're on uneven terrain, you're stepping on plants, or you're on a steep hillside with loose dirt, so your footing's not very good, and it's difficult to carry a monopod or tripod with you. Frequently, you have low light there because it can be cloudy, it can be raining, or the gorillas can be in a dense forested area, so there's not a lot of light around. They're black, their hair is black, and so that makes it difficult for the camera to meter them properly. They, of course, move around, and they'll get behind vegetation, or they'll look at you through a hole in the vegetation, so you're having to autofocus through a tiny little hole in a bush. So, all those things added together make them a pretty big challenge to take pictures of, but if you can get some good ones, it makes it all the more rewarding.
And while you were there, you had a chance to visit the Dian Fossey gorilla compound there, where they're doing their conservation efforts?
Sure. They have an office, a research center in Ruhengeri, which is the nearby town to Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda, and that houses several scientists and is the base of operations for their study of 3 families of habituated gorillas that are not open to tourists.
Oh, interesting.
And so
okay.
they study these 3 groups and study interactions, study reproductive behavior and things like that, and they also do a lot of community-based projects where they go out into the local communities to try to educate people about gorilla conservation and do things to assist the local communities in meeting their needs without infringing on the gorillas' habitat or other things that might be destructive or harmful to the gorillas.
And you had arranged that visit ahead of time?
Sure. I mean, the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund is based in Atlanta, where I live, and I happen to have the good fortune of knowing some people affiliated with it, and so I was able to correspond with them by email and talk to them so that we could arrange that visit.
And while you were still in, I don't recall which country, you also went to a chimpanzee conservation area? I'm not sure what exactly to call it.
It's actually a chimpanzee sanctuary. It's in Uganda near Entebbe. It's on an island in Lake Victoria, and it's called Ngamba Island. It's a place where they keep chimpanzees who are confiscated from poachers. Typically, they're very young when they're confiscated like that because they're caught for the pet trade. They can't really be released back into the wild, so the Jane Goodall Institute runs a chimpanzee sanctuary there to provide a home for chimpanzees that are the victims of poaching and that can't be released back into the wild.
I assume that that's a very different experience than going out here into the wild, into the mountain gorilla habitat.
Sure. Well, these are chimpanzees that, as a general matter, have lived under people's care for most or all of their lives. And they have a 100-acre forest on the island that they have free reign of, during the day, but at night they come back into cages. They're fed by the staff on the island, cared for by the veterinarians on the island, and, it's not like having to go out into the wild and find them. They're in a captive environment.
The overall experience in Rwanda and Uganda, obviously this is an area that's gone through some tremendously terrible times.
We had a great time. We didn't have any problems or fears whatsoever, no security problems or anything like that. Those countries have both been stable for quite some time, and there were lots of tourists there. The gorilla permits were sold out every day we were there. with more people wanting to get permits at the last minute who couldn't. We found the scenery to be stunningly beautiful. They're both very mountainous countries, at least Uganda in the southwestern part where we were is. And the people are very nice and friendly, and it's got a lot to offer in terms of different activities. So we enjoyed our visit to both places very much.
And is there any, Rwanda obviously has gone through genocide not that long ago. Any signs of that as you're going through the country? Is that something people just don't talk about? Or
no, they talk about it all the time. There's signs of it everywhere. There are genocide memorials everywhere in the country because it occurred everywhere in the country. The biggest one's in Kigali, the capital, but they also have them everywhere. It's also very common for you to see assemblies of people sitting outside in some of the small villages, and you'll see people dressed in pink as part of that. Those are local courts that were set up to try people who participated in the genocide at a lower level on kind of a community basis, and the people wearing pink are the defendants. And they have these sessions outdoors where they take evidence and they make a decision on guilty or innocent with respect to people who may have participated in the genocide. And even, now almost 13 years later, they're still going through and trying to bring to justice all the people who participated in that. So the signs of it are everywhere.
You say these would be more people on the local level. As I recall, the people at the higher level are being tried by the UN over in Tanzania.
Yeah, they have the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in Arusha.
Right.
Although there's some thought that if they don't finish up with all their cases, they may transfer the remaining defendants back to Rwanda for trial.
If I were to go to Rwanda or Uganda, what should I know before I go?
Well, I think the most important thing, from my standpoint, is to go with a reputable tour operator. There's several that operate in both countries because it's a place where it might be a little difficult to set up everything on your own and know all the ins and outs of it that you would need to do in advance and do it independently. So to me, that would be the most important thing, is to get a hold of a reputable tour operator. It's a place where you're going to be in an environment that's very different from the United States or Western Europe, but it's a very pleasant environment and one that has a lot to offer in terms of activities, particularly if you want to see gorillas. That's really the only two viable places to see them in the world. There's no mountain gorillas anywhere else except for those two places and in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the political instability there really deters a lot of travelers from going over there.
Sure, as well it should at that point. I believe I recall reading that more people have been killed in the wars that are going on in Congo than in all the other wars of the last century. So.
Yeah, and the place where most of the violence happens is in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and that's where their population of mountain gorillas is.
Okay. Actually, I think it's all since World War II. I overstated that a bit there. I had a little trouble even believing myself there.
Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me. They've had a long history of a lot of active conflict over there, and it doesn't seem to have quite resolved yet.
Right. Anything that you expected to be wonderful and was a little bit of a disappointment?
No, I don't think so. Everything really met my expectations. The tour operator we used was excellent. The lodges where we stayed were really top-notch. And, the gorilla experience, I think we got lucky because the weather was so great during all of our gorilla treks. We didn't get rained on at all, and we had good light and relatively cooperative gorillas each time. So, I would say that it all met my expectations and in a lot of instances exceeded them.
And talk about some of the things that exceeded them.
Besides seeing the gorillas in the wild, the other thing that was really special was in the chimpanzee sanctuary on Ngamba Island, being able to do a forest walk with the young chimpanzees. If you stay overnight on the island, they offer you the opportunity for an additional fee to take a forest walk for an hour with a group of about 10 of the younger chimpanzees. And, you go out into the forest with them. They jump on you and want to be held by you and ride on your back. You sit in a clearing with them. They will groom you or want to be groomed by you. They'll play with your shoelaces. One of them brought me a caterpillar as a present. And, then you walk back out through the forest with them, in a line of chimpanzees, and you really feel like you're a member of the chimpanzee troop for an hour. And it really gives you an incredible insight into their behavior, their thought processes, and, just what unique and extraordinary animals they are. That's an experience that I think is going to be really difficult to top on a future trip because it was so special.
Any final thoughts on this trip that you'd like to leave with the listeners?
I think it's a destination that is well worth it, and if it's something that you have any inclination to do, go as soon as you can, because the popularity of gorilla trekking is going up and up every year. They're setting records for attendance in the parks every year, and the permit fees are increasing as a result of that. They're even increasing them in March of this year. Since it requires good physical fitness, since the political and security situation over there is stable right now, and because it's getting more and more popular, if you have any inclination to go, now is the time.
Now, you mentioned the permit fees. I'm sort of assuming if there are so few a day that they are relatively expensive.
They are. At the time of our trip, the permits in both Uganda and Rwanda were $375 per person per day. And then in March, I think both countries are increasing it to $500. And, frankly, it doesn't matter what they charge. They're still going to sell out.
Right.
There's so many people who are interested in doing this. They can set the permit fee wherever they want. And they've escalated them several times over the last 5 years, and I'm sure it's going to continue to go up.
Now, one thing I'm curious about, with the cost of living difference between the people who are local there, are there any opportunities then for them to come and see it? Because they're not going. Most of them cannot afford anything close to that.
Sure,
I think you're talking about an annual salary there.
Right. Well, what's really funny is that some of the habituated guerrilla groups in both countries have a habit of actually coming out of the boundary of the park and hanging out in the farmland on the edge of the park. And we experienced this once with a group that we visited in Uganda, and I've talked to people who went to a group called Sabinyo in Rwanda that frequently does the same thing. And when that happens, the local kids in particular, or the local people, will be able to see the gorillas because they're out in the open on a farm field. And so there are some opportunities for the local people to see them. There may be others that I'm not aware of, but I do know that occurs.
Interesting. Well, Chris, thanks very much for coming back on the show here twice in 1 week. I appreciate your sharing your wonderful knowledge that you have with this. I assume that some people might be more interested in more details, and if they are, I'll have them email me and forward that off to you. I think Chris said he could talk about this for 2 days. That seemed a little long for a show, though.
Sure. Well, I'd be happy to answer any of your listeners' questions by email.
And I will include links, obviously, to Chris's photos again, and they are captivating. So I thank you for sharing those with us as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments on them. It certainly was a big focus for us to try to get good pictures on the trip, and I was really pleased with the outcome.
And thanks for coming.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
I have something different in the Internet Resources section for today, and that, unfortunately, is a negative review. Particularly, it's a review of the International Association of Air Travel Couriers at courier.org. And this is a fee-based organization. It's $45 a year to join, and I am currently recommending against joining. I hate to do that, and I do it with some hesitation, but I did write the organization a couple times over the last month and ask if there was more to this than I was finding to try and make sure that this was a fair and balanced review, and never heard back. But what I'm finding is this is an organization that you join to get access to air courier or low-cost flights where you are providing the service of having your baggage allotment be used for cargo, basically, and then you are flying with only carry-on luggage. The one thing I'm finding, though, is that the flights that are listed are very few in number. There are very few courier flights available, and those that are available are actually not through, as far as I can tell, the International Association of Air Couriers, but through separate companies such as Jupiter Air. And so, as far as I can tell, there is no need to join this organization, and when you join, you're not getting that much information. You are supposed to also get access to Consolidator flights. I have never seen the Consolidator flight web page work correctly, actually ever return any results. So I'm afraid I have to say, don't join this particular website, don't join this particular organization. In the community section of the show, the first thing that's of note, to me at least, is that right after this show goes up, I'm hopping on a plane and going to Turkey. So you should hear more about that. But I want you to know that because there is some possibility that there won't be a show next week, as I will be in another country, and it depends on whether I get another show together before I leave. In a small victory over spam, I can now declare that the discussion boards at amateurtraveler.com/board are spam free. There's some new technology that I'm using to keep out the spam bots. I get probably 50 to 100 different spam bots that are trying to create accounts any given day, and I found a way that seems to be working to keep them out. So you can now take advantage of those boards without having to worry about seeing Viagra ads, at least for now. So check that out, amateurtraveler.com/board. And speaking of the discussion boards, I had a great post from Claudia just this last week. She says, I started listening to the Amateur Traveler podcast a while back, but for some reason I felt like checking out the site. I'm a fairly experienced traveler, having quit working for a year and wandering around the globe. I padded through a laundry list of places including India, China, Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Egypt, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, France, Italy, Mexico, etc. I love hearing about what I wish I knew before I went, because I have so many of those, or weird things that happened and odd experiences you never thought were possible. More interestingly is the way long-term travel changed me as a person, how travel can really work hard sometimes, and how you can go numb to things that would normally be jaw-dropping when you see one amazing sight after another. And with that, we'll bring this show to a close. Feel free to drop me a line at host@amateurtraveler.com or call the comment line at 266-MOM-LOVE. That's 266-MOM-LOVE. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
The best and the brightest served up daily by the sharpest minds in content delivery, pod show, and limelight.